Okay, right. I already forgot.
Alrighty, we should be good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know all of you already, but I'm Erica. I work for Peaceworks, but I also got trained with Al Gore's Climate Reality Leader Project. July in the summer. I can't remember when, but so we've been teaching these. I mean, we've taught these climate classes before. I got certified in that, but since then we've taught a few, and this is kind of a new-ish topic. So Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I don't know pretty much any of you. So hello, my name is Nikki. I'm also a climate reality leader. I finished my training at the very beginning of August this past year, and I'm currently getting my master's of social work at Mizzou, and I'm focusing on environmental justice and advocacy in that work. So it's nice to meet you all.
Yeah. Well, cool. And so today we're going to be talking about just the shift to renewables before Nikki talks about just like the intro to the Green New Deal. And so I put part one there just because this week Nikki will go over just like the intro to the Green New Deal, and then next week we'll get into more of the details on it. I mean, we can talk about more of the details this week, but that's why we won't be going into like a great amount of detail this week, just so we can have some time to discuss and whatnot. If you want to go to the next slide, Nikki. So first off, like I said, I just wanted to talk about like why we should shift to renewables, and that's a huge portion of the Green New Deal is shifting to renewable energy. And so I also wanted to make a clarification between the difference in between alternative and renewable energy. And so renewable energy comes from a source that is naturally occurring and replenishes naturally without the interference of human intervention. So examples of renewable energy are, of course, like these two photos, wind and solar energy. And there are some others as well, like biomass resources and geothermal and hydro resources. And then the most abundant of these resources is solar energy. And so alternative energy does not include solar power, but includes resources like natural gas, which are usually obtained from fracking, and other energy resources that emits lower carbon emissions. And so oil, for example, is not considered an alternative or renewable energy resource since it's the leading cause of carbon emissions, but it also does not naturally replenish itself. And so Earth's oil reserves will eventually diminish, and kind of like nuclear energy generation, uranium, which is involved in nuclear energy generation, will also eventually run out. So if you want to go to the next one. So I just wanted to cover really quick how wind and solar energy works. And so this is just a graphic of how wind energy works. So of course, wind turns the blades of a wind turbine, and the turbine turns the generators, making electricity, and the transformers at substations increase the voltage of that electricity. And then the electricity joins the grid and is distributed to whether it be houses or businesses. If you want to go to the next one. And this is how solar energy works. So solar panels on a house or a business convert sunlight to DC electricity, and DC just stands for direct current, which means like a one directional flow of electrical charge. And then an inverter, as you can see there, converts the direct current to alternating current or AC energy, which is then used in the home, and the excess is sent out onto the grid. And so why do we have to shift to renewables as a nation and as a world? And so it's because although personal changes, like the ones we hear all the time about, like reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, drive less, etc., just aren't enough. And so we need a full-scale change in the way that we generate power for everything from food to driving to work to charging our phones every night. If you want to go to the next one, Nikki. And so as you can see here, this is the breakdown of greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 to 2018. And so some of these things we can control as individuals, like I was saying before. So we can make changes, and we can choose how we get from one place to another. We can choose to ride bikes or take the bus, and we can choose to shop for our food locally or buy used clothes or clothes with less impact on the environment. But all of that combined won't change the dire situation that we are in right now. And we can't change how our electricity is generated, for example. Like I can keep my house at 55 degrees all winter, but I can't change the fact that my house is powered by coal energy here in Missouri. And so, and we, especially if we don't have the money or resources, we can't change how that electricity is generated. Like I don't own my house, and so I can't put solar panels on the roof of it. And quite frankly, a lot of people can't afford to make huge changes like that. And so, and we also can't change how our office or favorite restaurant generates energy either. And so we can't control how industries that produce so many of these things, like you can see here, industry produces 22% of greenhouse gas emissions. And we can't change how they use energy and emit greenhouse gas emissions. So the best thing we can do is to have policies and incentives and infrastructure that promotes a greener future that we want and need to survive on Earth. If you want to go to the next one, Nikki. And so because if we don't, it'll be more of this, like this graph here. So our average world temperatures will just keep getting warmer, like you can see on the right there, those extreme, that maroon color are those extreme temperatures, until the world we know it just becomes unrecognizable. And so it may not happen in our lifetime, but that's definitely not an excuse to not act now. No, that's weird. Oh, sorry. You can click it. It has a transition on it.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. And so those rising temperatures have already caused irreparable damage to our planet. And so obviously we're here to learn about the Green New Deal and how to advocate for climate policy and change, but those rising temperatures are causing our climate to change already, and weather events are becoming more severe, and droughts are lasting longer, and fires are burning longer and more often, and a whole host of other things, from health emergencies to mass migration of humans and species of all kingdoms. And so we must cut our emissions significantly. If you want to press the cursor, Nikki, to the next one. There you go. And so we must, like I said, cut our emissions significantly. And not everyone is, like I said before, in the financial position or has the opportunity to do this themselves right now. And so a top-down approach with widespread changes are our best chance at this point. And it's not to say that you shouldn't make these personal changes. Of course, that's definitely not what I'm trying to say. And if you can, you should. And it helps a lot. And your leading by example is also helps a lot in like a pay it forward kind of way. 3 people see you do it, and so they start to do it, and the cycle continues. But we need to elect local, state, and federal leaders to hopefully create a more just and livable future for all of us. And so that is what these 4 weeks will essentially be about: how we can compel our elected officials and government staffs to make real change on the subject of climate action. If you want to go to the next one, Nikki. And so really quickly, I just wanted to cover why policies like the Green New Deal and renewable energy are so attainable now. And so like you can see on this graph, for wind cost, renewable energy is becoming so cheap now, cheaper than most other forms of energy, and especially fossil fuels. Here you can see the cost of wind and how much cheaper it's gotten since the 1980s. And the same, and for wind, very similarly, the cost has gone down astronomically since the 1970s for solar as well. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Nikki to show a short video on the Green New Deal and start her part of the presentation.
Yeah, so this video, oh, hold on, I'm gonna wait just 1 second. Okay, it's just kind of serves as a good introduction to the Green New Deal, why it was created, just sort of a general overview, and then I'll get a little bit more into detail. So it's about 7 minutes long, so get comfortable and enjoy. Oh, maybe not. Hold on. Let's see what I can do here. Does viewing it like this work for everyone? I'm not quite sure how to get it to play.
You can probably put down in the right-hand corner, that square there will make it full screen. Oh. Sorry, the square on the slide.
Oh, my bad. This one? Okay,
there you go. Yep.
There we go. Look at me go. All right, here we go.
Is the audio on it, Nikki?
Yeah. Can you guys not hear it?
I can't now.
Nope.
Well, interesting.
You have to share your sound, and that's up at the top, I think.
Sorry, everyone.
If you want,
Oh,
I
share
can-
sound. I got it. We're good.
Cool.
Okay. Sorry. Let's try
No
this
worries.
again.
It is the age we are living in now.
Is this better?
Yep.
The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, Indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Right. Thank you guys for listening to that. So moving on to what the Green New Deal is. Before I get into that, I want to talk about what the Green New Deal is not. So it's not a law, it's not a bill, it's not a policy proposal. It's essentially a non-binding congressional resolution aimed at tackling inequality and climate change. So that means that even if Congress approves it, nothing really becomes a law. It's more so just a set of suggestions needed to be done in order to fix the problem. So it was introduced in 2019 by Senators Ed Markey and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it is a 14-page document that essentially outlines what our shared understanding of the problem is and what's necessary to fix it. And more specifically, it outlines a 10-year plan to essentially mobilize every aspect of American society to combat climate change, environmental degradation, economic inequality, and racial injustice. So to put it broadly, it identifies two crises: the climate crisis, which is a bit more well-known, and then the economic crisis of wage stagnation and the growing inequality in our country. So what are the goals of the Green New Deal? Overall, the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change while simultaneously addressing economic inequality and racial justice. So the Green New Deal can essentially be divided into two parts. The first part talking about reaching zero greenhouse gas emissions and phasing out of fossil fuel reliance as much as feasibly possible. And then the second part talks about how people and economic prosperity can be protected during that transition. So there are 5 main goals outlined in the Green New Deal. The first one is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So that's essentially eliminating pollution and greenhouse gas emissions as much as technologically possible. The second goal is to create high-wage jobs to ensure prosperity and economic security. So shifting jobs away from the fossil fuel industry and more towards the renewable energy industry, and stopping the transfer of jobs and pollution to overseas and growing more domestic manufacturing opportunities here in the US. The third goal is to invest in infrastructure and industry. So that basically looks like building new and upgrading existing buildings to achieve maximum energy efficiency. The fourth goal is to secure a sustainable environment for all generations to come. So we want all future generations and current generations to have access to clean air and water, to healthy foods, and equal access to nature as well. And then the fifth and final goal is to promote justice and equity. So the fact of the matter is that the impacts of climate change do not affect us equally. Environmental destruction usually affects frontline and vulnerable populations disproportionately. So specifically groups including Indigenous peoples, peoples of color, youth, and low-income workers are typically experiencing the greatest impact of climate change, despite the fact that they usually contribute the least to the problem. Okay, so that's kind of a general overview just of what the Green New Deal is. We'll be going more in detail of the policies and how these goals can be achieved next week. But any questions that you guys have now, we would love to hear them.
I also, were you going to say something, Mark?
I was going to sort of make a question, sort of a statement, but I guess I'll just go ahead and do that. One of the things I see when I see this Green New Deal is that it is very broad. It's not just addressing technology, it's addressing a whole bunch of different things that involve reprioritization. But one thing that I've noticed that's really absent in reading it over, and I don't know if you all have any insight into the thinking of those who've put this forward, but there is no mention of war or militarism or the military-industrial complex, or the fact that the US spends more on the military than the next 10 largest spending countries combined, or the fact that you get many more jobs per dollar spent if you invest in energy efficiency and renewables than if you put money into military hardware. And I'm just wondering if you have any sense as to why the framers, when they did something so broad that they were calling for a full employment guarantee and calling for universal health care and single payer health care and all these other things that are not as, they're related to climate change, but kind of indirectly, you know. War and militarism is even more directly, in my experience, related because the US military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels in the world. But there's no mention. I read through the whole 14 pages and lots of commentary on it. I've never seen anything addressing the military or war and peace issues. Any sense on that?
That's a really good observation. Yeah, I don't really know why it wasn't mentioned. I don't know if you have anything to add, Erica, but that's something that we can definitely look into more and see what we can bring back next week.
I kind of have a question about your question. Do you mean like why they like, I'm trying to phrase how I want to ask my question. Like, are you asking why they don't account for like a future including that kind of like including like the necessity of a large military and war and stuff like that? Or are you just asking, like, I guess I want you to expand on your question.
I guess it's the politics of it.
Yeah.
Why do they think that you could get all these other things? I mean, when you all said this is a resolution, it's not legislation.
Mhm.
That's true, but the idea would be you pass the resolution, you get the country to commit to this
Mhm.
path, and then you have specific enabling legislation to make
Mhm.
all the various changes.
Mhm.
And uh, I just wonder why, when people keep raising the question, how are you going to pay for this? One of the
Yeah.
mo- most easy places to tap is cut a couple $100 billion out of the bloated military budget. They're already
Mhm.
getting close to $1 trillion a year in military spending, and it's totally unnecessary. We've got a big ocean on the east called the Atlantic. We've got a bigger ocean on the west called the Pacific. We've got allied and friendly countries to the north, Canada, to the south, Mexico. Nobody's threatening to invade our country.
Mhm.
Uh, Yet we maintain this militarized economy, and we squander all this money each year that could be invested in
Mhm.
efficiency and renewables and making the transformation to a sustainable future. And it would just seem like a logical piece to put in there, as
Yeah.
logical as full employment or healthcare.
Mhm. I think it would be, I mean, I know the wars, at least in the Middle East, are multifaceted and very complicated, but I think a huge part of them is that the fight over fossil fuels. And I think, I don't know whether that would be more polarizing or more positive to mention in something, you know what I mean? Like, to try and make the Green New Deal as appealing as possible to all people in the United States. I don't know if it would be better to mention that or to not mention that. You know what I mean?
Well, I know what you mean, but it still seems to me
Yeah.
that it would be an integral part of making that transformation.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, definitely.
Uh, Isn't it true, though, that states that have military bases and military industries, that, anytime it's talked about taking some of the money out of that military budget, these senators, what have you, fight like hell to keep those bases and those industries in their states. It's like it's it's almost like you'll never get those places to spend less money on military spending because of the jobs and what have you it brings to their states, districts, what have you. And you know, I I'm not saying it's insurmountable, but I'm trying to think of a way that you could reverse that and spend that money on
well,
climate change.
for decades, there have been groups around the country and on the national level arguing for something that they call economic conversion, or creation of a peace economy.
Mhm.
And the idea would be to beat the swords into plowshares and put people to work in good, high paying jobs, making wind turbines rather than making tanks. And, it, making solar panels,
Mhm.
making insulation, and all the things you need to create an energy efficient economy. Uh, EVs, there's just no absence of the potential for manufacturing jobs that
Mhm.
could be, places to put people to work if they are displaced from uh, current military spending. But I don't
Well,
want
and
to belabor this. I know you have other things to cover, but
no, I was just actually thinking, in a wonderful world, we could use our military to help other countries install greener, greener infrastructure in countries that say like US troops are stationed, but I don't know if that would ever happen.
send in a Peace Corps.
There you go. But no, that is a really good observation, and I would like to research that more. I could guess why it's not in there, but I don't know for sure why it might not be in there. And before any of you ask any other questions, I also wanted to ask like what you wanted us to cover in the next 4 weeks, and even just next week. I didn't do this with the class that we just held in what is it, February, but if there's something like with the Green New Deal specifically, like Mark just mentioned, with the militarism and military spending, or if there's an aspect of, I don't know, advocacy that you're wondering about that maybe we would cover, but maybe not, and that you would like to hear a bit more about. Anybody?
While you guys think about that, I guess we can kind of give you an overview as to what we were thinking about covering, maybe to spark some ideas. So like I said, next week we plan on doing a bit of a deeper dive into the Green New Deal policies and the feasibility of implementing something like this. And then week 3, we were going to talk about advocacy at the local, state, and federal level, as well as providing tips on how you can be an environmental advocate from home during a pandemic. And then the 4th week, we were going to highlight some key organizations to follow for more information about how to be an advocate in Missouri. And then having some guest speakers there as well from different organizations in the area. So if there's anything in addition to those topics that I haven't mentioned that you want covered, we would love to hear it.
I know I'm talking a lot, but I would put 2 things up there. One is a thoroughgoing discussion of the pricing of carbon. This has been a very divisive issue within the movement for climate justice and climate action. And without getting into it, there's some groups that focus almost entirely on market-based solutions, and the notion that pricing carbon and internalizing the externalities is key to making the transformation. Others think that raising the price of carbon is the wrong way to go, and it alienates people and makes it more likely that those who are climate deniers will win elections and run the show. So that would be one question. Another question would be nuclear. And the Biden administration hasn't been talking about this much, but part of their platform is to invest in small modular reactors. And many of us in the environmental justice movement have long been opposed to nuclear fission as an energy source, but it would probably be an interesting thing to discuss the pros and cons of building new nukes.
I second that emotion.
Well, thanks,
Good
Mark.
suggestions.
We can definitely go over both of those things.
Erica, were you able to view that video on the small reactors? I think I sent it.
I was not yet. Do you want to tell us about it?
Oh, well, no, it's just that these much smaller reactors theoretically are much safer, and they do not use water as a coolant, but sodium. And you know, it's one of these projects that Bill Gates has invested a lot of money into, but you know, that holds a lot of promise. And you know, back in the 80s, I was an anti-nuke guy. I went on the marches and stuff like that. And you know, I've kind of come full circle, because if you look at what fossil fuels do, you're dealing with so many different what's the word I'm looking for? Input, you know, so many different areas of our lives contribute to increasing carbon, and you know, and addressing all those. Well, you know, the thing about clean and safe atomic energy is it's clean and it's safe, and it does take care of, you know, a lot of what we use fossil fuels for now. So I don't know. I'm just kind of a fan of it at this point, from what I've read. I'll stop talking.
No, you all can keep talking. Your questions, comments, we can just have a laid back discussion too. Next week will be like a tiny bit longer, but we just wanted to give you an intro, because we knew that if we combined the Green New Deal all together, it would be way too long of a conversation.
It's sad that, in a way, that, you know, it's just a resolution, that it's not it have any kind of teeth to it, you know. I mean, when do you think that will happen? When, you know, people are dropping dead in the street?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I only have local government, and also Nikki has some experience with local government as well. And it's, you said it pretty well, Nikki, when you were talking to me about local government.
What I said was, it's basically a lot of meetings talking about change. And, you know, making change. There's just like a lot of red tape to get through. You know, you have to get establish proposals, get things approved by city council, at least at the local level. So it's just kind of a longer process, and you know, having climate deniers in the mix only adds to that lengthy process. So yeah, it's a good question of when we can actually see some meaningful change at the federal level, for sure.
Yeah. And that's one of the unfortunate connotations with the Green New Deal, is that it's just some magic wand that they wave and all of a sudden our world is different and people lose jobs and everything's turned upside down, which is not true at all. And things would move much slower than that. And
the
much
governor of Texas really threw it under the bus a couple of weeks ago. You know, it's like, I mean, what kind of a fantasy world? It was just unbelievable, you know, to think that that was the cause of poor management of their, you know, grid.
Yeah,
How the windmills and solar caused it.
Yeah, you're right, Michael. It's just, yeah, it's negative and frankly false, I guess, information that drives most of the difficulties, I think, with working on climate change, that unfortunately it has been so politicized, and who knows if that will ever change.
One thing I'd throw out there in terms of when we might be able to enact the Green New Deal, that question, currently we have, I mean, I should say whenever I'm talking about electoral politics, it's not pieceworks advocating for particular parties or candidates, because we're a 501c3 and don't. But the reality is that the Republican Party is almost to a person in terms of their elected leadership opposed to something like the Green New Deal. There's a very modest number of Republicans who are part of a caucus in Congress that does favor climate action, but they're almost all in the camp of wanting just to put a price on carbon, which you know, doesn't address the other aspects of a Green New Deal, or even effectively how we can get the technology in place to do it. It's belief in the marketplace is the answer. But the other thing is that the Democrats hold very you know, minor majorities in both. I mean, in the Senate, it's basically a tie with a tiebreaker from the vice president. And in the House, they have only about a 10 vote or 11 vote majority. And what that means is that if you've got people like Joe Manchin, who comes from West Virginia, a coal state, as part of that Democratic caucus, you're not going to get dramatic climate change legislation through, or comprehensive legislation. And Biden himself has said he's not endorsing the Green New Deal, but his policies are informed by the Green New Deal, whatever that means. So, you know, I think what we're going to see at best is, in this Congress, piecemeal progress. If we can gain enough momentum so the outcome of the 2022 elections is different from usual midterms, in that the governing party would gain rather than lose seats, then there'd be the potential for actually doing something. Right now, I think the best we can hold out for immediate action on the federal level is the infrastructure bill. And that's their next big move. And there's talk about it being over $1 trillion, not all in one year, but over the course of several years, to be invested in infrastructure. And that infrastructure is, as Nikki was saying earlier, including weatherizing and insulating buildings, making them more energy efficient, but it's also putting in, you know, transmission lines, so you can move, you know, these high voltage DC transmission lines, like the Grain Belt Express, that's been such a controversial one, to move wind power from the high plains to the cities of the Midwest, to St. Louis, to Kansas City, to Chicago. That's really needed. And it's possible that this infrastructure bill can include high-speed rail, like AOC was talking about in that video. can include investments in things that would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions without being directly a climate bill.
Yeah.
And to me, that seems like it might be, the most promising in terms of the short run. And then it's a matter of, well, where do we go past this? Because we're still at a point here in Missouri where our state legislature and our governor are firmly entrenched in the climate denial, do nothing camp.
Hmm.
That's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about kind of essentially the power of language. And I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago that mentioned, in some more states that are hostile towards renewable energy and climate action, sometimes it's best to sort of advocate for that change without mentioning those, those key words like climate change, renewable energy, and kind of figuring out a way, like you just mentioned with the infrastructure bill, to kind of initiate change without necessarily making it about climate change.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Playing into the I think in the last class we talked about with how to talk to people about climate change to kind of bring it down to like their values, like what you just said, Nikki. Like I don't know, if someone is really passionate about being like financially responsible or whatnot, kind of framing climate action in that way, but not mentioning climate action, just how it's fiscally responsible to add so-and-so jobs by adding this infrastructure to the United States or something like that. So, which is still true, but it's just, yeah, you're right, how to spin it, I guess.
How's it being taught in the school system? Climate change. I mean, is it part of science curriculum?
I know, I mean, I think curriculum, because Peaceworks tried to work on this or tried to help advocate for at least Columbia Public Schools to teach climate change. And I think they do sparingly and definitely not at all levels. But it's not necessarily a problem with the schools. It's a problem with the state curriculum because they kind of manage all of that. But I don't know. Do you know more, Nikki, about other states?
Not so much about other states. I was just going to mention, I have one of my friends from high school is a middle school teacher in Lexington, Missouri. And we were talking about this not too long ago. She has curriculum to teach it in one grade, in seventh grade, but not in any of the other grades. And she was also telling me, unfortunately, whether or not that content is actually covered kind of varies from teacher to teacher, just because the idea of climate action isn't quite as accepted in that part of the state. So, she teaches it and she makes sure to kind of get that information out there. Whereas she was telling me some other teachers who are not quite as progressive with the idea of the need for climate action, they're not quite as willing to touch on that content, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I don't remember. I don't think I learned about it in like earth sciences in high school. I'm not sure about anyone else here who's in the millennial age range, but yeah, I'm not, I can't really remember ever addressing it.
I learned about it in AP Environmental Science in 11th grade. And I remember talking quite a bit because the teacher was wildly passionate about it. We like focused on it throughout the entire year, really. And we also discussed why it wasn't taught, throughout like a statewide curriculum. And that was really, really relieving and pivotal for me in high school to have that teacher. But beyond that, I hadn't learned about it. Like, of course I was aware of it, but school wise, no.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm glad you had that teacher though, Maud.
Me too.
Yeah.
Like, very much so.
Mhm.
Austin just mentioned in the chat that he doesn't remember getting a lot of formal education on it in Colorado, but it was discussed more informally.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, even on the topic of like environmental justice as a social worker, we're really dedicated to fighting injustices and advocating for vulnerable populations. And the whole crossover of that with climate change, I learned about it. I think it was one paragraph in one chapter of a book that we covered in one class. So it's really not as talked about as it should be.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I feel like it will be now going into where we are and what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I hope so. I definitely hope so. I hope
The
a lot more.
students definitely will be talking about it.
Yeah. I hope a lot more things will be talked about, from history to science and climate change.
Oh yeah.
Have been in the past.
One thing I would throw out there is that we often hear rhetoric around our children are our future and we need to invest in our future by giving them a quality education and making them aware of these issues. And that's all true. There's no denying that. It's also true that we have, at this point, 9 years till 2030, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said is a date by which we have to cut emissions by 50% if we hope to stay within the level of climate change that is not totally off the wall unacceptable. So current people in power are going to have to make the decisions, because people who are high school students this year are not going to be in Congress next year. You have to be at least 25 to be there, you know? And even when you get a rare outlier like AOC getting in there when she's like 28 or 29 or something like that, it's still a real situation that we've got to figure out how to exert enough influence, or you might say pressure, on those who currently are in decision-making positions to get some of these policy changes made in the short run, because we can't afford to wait for the long run.
Yeah.
Time to hit the streets.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I remember as a kid, protest after protest over so many things, Vietnam War, whatever. And, you know, I often wonder whatever happened to that kind of, you know, people just don't seem to have it in them anymore. You know, it's like somebody else will take care of it, or technology will take care of it, or else they're too stupid to understand it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about, we do see a lot of positivity from younger generations and wanting change, but it's not necessarily only up to them. Yes, it's important for them to live, I don't know, the most prosperous lives that they can, but in the future, but it's not all up to them to make the decisions. Does anyone else have any questions or anything they want to discuss?
I think that the pressure will be unstoppable and is already underway. And I have no doubt about that in particular, the push for what is more altruistic from the youth, like to respond to the previous comment about not having, because I know what you're saying about how, but it's much different now in like the digital age and how it's like taking place is, but like I personally am not even on social media due to how overwhelming it is for me to see all of the, well, I mean, it's a really good thing, but of course it's also just for on a personal level, very overwhelming. And I want to do stuff at a local level as well as being informed. But there's so much activism going on is the point that I'm trying to make. That's like totally unstoppable.
Well,
Yeah,
I think that a lot of people feel that, you know, saying something on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, that's advocacy, you know, that's, they've done their part. You know, it's like, well, we'll put a bumper sticker on our car and we've done our bit. you know, and
Mhm.
God.
Yeah, I think just because of the like the generational change and what is like evolving and how the youth is using different instruments, I mean different vehicles for advocacy, like it's not as familiar or maybe as recognizable as like more traditional forms that we saw like in the civil rights movement, or like just being really hands-on.
Mhm.
And but it's like I totally see what you're saying, but I also think that there's like monumental movements coming together like digitally through electronics that are like totally committed and have so much integrity and so much of a powerhouse that's actually pretty legit, I've found, because I'm like, you know, of that generation, so I'm in the loop, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
Well, I'm young at heart.
Yeah.
I think you make a good point, Michael. But I also think it is a good start to just to use your voice, and then maybe someone thinks like sees that post and is like, maybe I should probably, or maybe I should look into this more, whether or not they agree with it. So, and hopefully that then snowballs into something else. But yeah, I agree. You can't just post something on Facebook and then not look at it again, and not look at the issue again. But it's a good start for sure. And apparently the TikTok these days has some pretty activism on it, as
The
I've
TikTok.
heard. The TikTok. I
They've also got this
refuse
whole shuffle dancing thing.
I refuse to look at it because I am afraid I won't be able to
It
stop. But
eats your brain. It eats your brain. I was never on Instagram, but for this book thing I've done, I had to get on. I was told, oh, you've got to get on there, and actually had somebody telling me what pictures I should be putting on, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like it's like about a mile wide and an inch deep. It's like it just makes me feel stupid every time. If I check out what numbers I have going for my Instagram feed, with my pictures and stuff, and then I start exploring around, and I just feel soiled and stupid and regret.
Well, here's hoping you feel more confident next time you go on Instagram.
Take it in just a slightly different direction. I think that it's really critical at this point, and I think the Green New Deal tries to do this, to be intersectional, to recognize that there's an intersection between environmental justice and racial justice and economic justice, gender justice. You can go around the whole picture and see that these are all connected, that we need a whole transformation that's cultural transformation in terms of what we value. We need to figure out how to value and create a culture that's based on cooperation, caring, sharing, and having a approach that looks at the consequences of actions, not just in the limited sense of what directly impacts me, but what impacts our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, those who come after us, what impacts people around the world whose skin color might be different, whose culture might be different, but are also part of humanity, what impacts the other species we share the earth with. These things are all connected, and the decisions we make need to reflect that kind of consideration, considering those situations, and not just be a single thing like I'm, anti-war, or I'm anti-nuke, or I'm pro-solar, or I'm pro-choice, or whatever. It's got to be something that integrates and sees the intersection of these various concerns, because we're not going to make it if we don't recognize those interconnections and the urgency of addressing these problems. Population's another big piece. We're very, very close to 8 billion people on the planet and heading to 10 billion by mid-century.
Yep.
too many.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up, Mark, that that we'll cover for sure next week. All righty. Well, Nikki, do you have anything else you want to?
I don't think so. I appreciate the discussion that we've been engaging in, guys.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything else.
Okay. So yeah, just the same link and time next week. And like I said, the presentation might be a bit longer, but nothing terribly long. Oh yeah, did you want to talk about this slide, Nikki?
Yeah, just briefly mentioning, like we just said, same time next week, same link. We'll be taking a deeper dive into the Green New Deal, its policies, and then bringing up some of the stuff that was mentioned in our discussion tonight. For those of you on social media, we do have a Facebook group, and I will put the link to it in the chat right now. But if you guys want to share this with your Facebook friends, that would be great. Just to kind of get the word out there. Let's see. How do I get that
Can I
to the
just
chat?
mention that in addition to this going on next week, the Sustainable Living Fair is going on throughout the week and into the next, I believe.
Mhm.
And Laura is still on here. Maybe she could share a little about that. Maybe she's not there. I can only see like 5 people other than myself.
I'm here.
Oh.
Yeah, we have the Sustainable Living Fair. It's gonna span across 2 weeks, and we have workshops on composting, and it's all virtual, so it's either going to be a live workshop or recorded workshop with some opportunities for questions and answers on some of those. We have things on rain barrels. We have things on composting. We have native plant gardening. We have landscaping for birds and butterflies. We have some river and stream cleanup tips. We have information on the watersheds of Missouri. What else? Home solar energy and what is available for the consumer as far as rebates and things like that go. A fermentation workshop. And I think that's elderberry growing, shady plant, edible garden growing from the Center for Agroforestry. We have a mushroom growing workshop. So you can find out more about that on our Facebook page, Peaceworks or Center for Sustainable Living. And you can also look at the Earth Day website, columbiaearthday.org, for more information there. So
Thank you for sharing that. That's all.
It's all free.
yeah, all free. And the first thing starts next Tuesday, the 16th, with the City of Columbia's composting workshop.
Cool. Thanks, Laura. I forget what I was just gonna say. Oh, I was going to mention Michael had a good idea for our last class about to challenge everyone to bring another person next week. So I challenge you all to do that as well. And Nikki and I will also challenge ourselves to get one more person to come to the class. Wow, cool. Thank you.
This
all.
is going to be part of the Sustainable Living Fair next week. So hopefully we will have a bunch of people checking it out from there.
Yeah, hopefully, but no cheating. You can't lie and say that those are the people you brought.
If you bring 2 people, you get a special prize.
All righty. Well, thank you. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you for having us.